Well, here I am, Bill Sherck, the man about the woods, sitting all alone here in the world headquarters of the Minnesota Bound podcast. The stories behind the stories. I've got engineer Brandon sitting across the table from me, but we have incredible technology which allows us to hook up with the world's only official gentleman forager. Mike, are you there?
I am, Bill. How are you?
How the heck are you?
I'm awesome. I'm, every day closer to spring we get, the more excited I become. Ready to get out there in the woods and get back to what I really enjoy doing most.
Mike Kempenich, you are the gentleman forager, a guy who has literally been foraging for 40 years, 45 years, something like that.
Most of my life, yeah. I mean, since I was a kid growing up picking morels with Dad, back in I guess it would have been the early 70s probably when I started picking mushrooms and with some serious endeavor.
It just got into your blood somehow. What is it for you?
I've always been if you talked to me before I got into this as a business, people would have told you that I was just a fanatic about fishing. Which I was, and I've always been a hunter. And so I think I've always foraged, but more as a passive activity. But I think it's the hunt itself. I find it very similar in many respects to hunting and fishing, just from the whole approach of how do you determine where to look and where to go and why this space might have been more successful than that space. And you're really applying the same logic that you're using when you're hunting or fishing. So I think it's a natural for anybody who's an outdoor person and enjoys the outdoors and hunting and fishing. I think it's just a really natural fit.
And to give people some understanding of what this is, what foraging is, it's going out into a wild space and finding things of use to you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, people's ideas of foraging are very different depending upon the region you might live in, or the region of the country, or even the region of Minnesota. So it might be in the springtime, a lot of what our foraging involves is wild plants and such. And later in the year, of course, there's wild rice and there's berries and nuts and so it isn't just mushrooms, and that is really, I think, what makes it so fascinating and a lot like a snake eating its tail for people that get into it. Is the more you learn, the more you realize how much there is to learn.
Yeah.
And you go from hunting morels for a couple of weeks each spring to over a lifetime realizing that, gosh, if the world ends tomorrow, I can probably identify about 100 things to eat in the woods here.
Right. And I think as people, humans are motivated by reward. Like it or
Absolutely.
not, right? And
Absolutely.
Every time I go in to forage, I know there could be a little reward at the end. And that's part of the fun for me.
That is so true. I mean, even on a poor day, I think that's what certainly gets me going. When we're out there picking for commercial purposes, it's really hard work, and you're probably putting on 10 to 15 miles in a day, and you're carrying a lot of heavy weight, hopefully, because you're finding them. But even on a bad day, there's something that year after year keeps me going, because just as you said, you realize, hey, around that next bend, it looks really good, and you're often rewarded with persistence to find that fat patch that you can, recall for years to come.
All right, so explain to people what it means when you say commercially collecting.
Well, we, Gentleman Forager is our wholesale business, so we provide wild food products to many of the restaurants in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the surrounding area. And to be into the commercial side, you can't be picking on private property, so you have to have relationships with landowners or have your own private property. And so over the years, I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of really great people who are nice enough to let me come on their property. And so when we're out there, it's a business. And so we're thinking in terms of not picking, a basket of chanterelles, but rather how do we find 200 pounds of chanterelles?
Wow.
That kind of thing. So it's, and I have to tell you, it's part of what I love so much is the aspect that for a lot of people, they'll never have an opportunity to try something like a morel or a chanterelle or a black trumpet. Maybe they're unable to move about in the woods. Maybe they don't live near the wood, for a multitude of reasons. And so, we feel very good about being able to put those mushrooms in the hands of people through our retail store at Forest to Fork.
It's funny because I've always had an interest. Foraging for me for a long time was morels, right? And I think it's that way for a lot of people in this world. And I don't know how long it's been, probably 12 or 14 years ago. I did a story on Minnesota's Mycological Society. Mm-hmm. Which is a group of quirky, passionate people who go out and they try to find mushrooms. And they'll do these hunts together. So we followed them at a not-to-be-named, I think it was a state park. In fact, I'm sure it was. And there are all these diehards, Mike, right, who know every little nook and cranny, and they're looking for this secret sign. And they had, I think it was a foreign exchange student along from Sweden.
Right.
And he comes walking out in front of the camera, and he has these morels that, honest to goodness, were the size of turkey drumsticks. And he kind of said in his accent, "Is this what we're looking for?"
That's such an apt description.
And everyone was ready to punch this poor kid out because he had found the mother lode.
It's you're right. It's an interesting group of people. That's another part of what I really like when we do our events up north. For instance, when you and I actually had a chance to meet on the front end for our lobster jamboree. It's fascinating to find. You can have everybody from a guy who's, bussing tables to, a retired attorney and his wife.
Yeah.
And everybody in between. But to everything we're talking about, the same things appeal in the same ways to so many different people. But when you do get in that mycological community, there's a little bit of the academia sort of vibe to it. A lot of the people that have been involved for many years there study mushrooms on a deeper scientific level, which is really great to kind of have people like that can identify some of the very uncommon mushrooms. It's a great opportunity if you are looking for a place to start, and you're around the cities. They meet once a month and do a great job of educating the public.
And that day, seeing those people and watching them and understanding their passion just really helped grow my interest too, right? It's fun to see people who like certain topics outdoors, right? And this is their niche. And for you, I think it's a little bit of the same, right? Because at some point, this passion became more than a hobby. It became lifestyle. It became business for you. But then it almost came full circle because now you have the opportunity to share what you love with other people.
Yeah, that's been a lot of fun. When I first started, I began actually as a cultivator. My idea originally was, hey, we live in Minnesota. Wouldn't it be awesome if I could bring a cluster of beautiful blue oyster mushrooms to a chef in January in Minnesota that I just picked 20 minutes ago. And so that was a lot of fun. But I learned after about 2 years, I looked back that I hadn't had a vacation. I hadn't had a day off. It's a bit like being a dairy farmer. The mushrooms don't stop growing.
Right.
So I started thinking in terms of, to your point, having the lifestyle that I really wanted to create too. And so we kind of changed things up a little bit. I started teaching classes. Originally, it was a certification classes for people who thought that they might want to become a commercial picker for sale through the University of Minnesota and the University of Wisconsin, and that grew into hosting events where we get a group of 50 people or so and bring them up north and bring up a couple of great chefs that we might work with in town, and we usually have a band come up and really sort of bring everything together where you have the great food, you have some great music, you have a diverse group of really fun people that are all looking forward to a fun learning experience. And of course the mushrooms on top of that and the hunt and everything that goes along with it. And that's really dramatically changed kind of who we are as a company. We continue to expand in the educational arena. We like to work with young people, especially. I think in today's day and age, the eating habits of Americans, we all know, are probably not the greatest, and so it's a lot of fun to visit with the schools and the high school students or junior high students and talk a little bit about something they generally know very little about. And it's always super interesting. When I start out, I usually ask everybody, "Hey, how many people here like mushrooms?" And I usually get about one hand or maybe two out of a room of 40.
Right.
And then by the time we get done and they sample some mushrooms, and I ask that question again, "How many of you liked at least one of the mushrooms you sampled?" Virtually every hand goes up, and so that's kind of a cool thing to see, and people understand better that, hey, mushrooms, in addition to being really delicious, a lot of people are surprised to find that they all have different textures. They all have different flavor profiles. We were talking a little bit earlier about a mushroom that has the exact flavor component, same chemical compound as maple syrup. Chanterelles taste fruity, like apricot, a very light, fruity flavor. All mushrooms are not white button mushrooms. So it's fun to educate the public on that. And then to talk a lot about that, the many health benefits that come directly from mushrooms in ways that other food sources don't deliver to our bodies. So it's it's just a really full circle sort of thing that you don't have to be involved up to your neck, but there's plenty of room to get involved up to your neck if it interests you.
And I feel like, not to stereotype, but to be a realist here, when people think of mushrooms, they think of a blue styrofoam package with white mushrooms topped in saran wrap, right? That's what we all know and see when we head into the local grocery. So this is
which is irritating to me because it's so anti. Like don't get me wrong, I like all mushrooms, but we're working to change that. In fact, we're going to have a lot of our mushrooms and periodically exotic mushrooms, wild mushrooms, in packaged form.
Wow!
Beginning with Kowalski's markets here in town. Very shortly here. And to your point, they will no longer come in an unrecyclable plastic tin with saran wrap. They'll come in a really beautiful box that's full of all kinds of great information about what makes this mushroom super healthy for you, what kind of recipe you might want to use it in, where to find all of the items in the aisle to make that recipe. I think it'll be a really fun experience for people to really taste some of these mushrooms that maybe they've never tried before.
We are right now part of the Minnesota Bound podcast, the stories behind the stories. And of course, this episode doesn't happen without a lot of support. I'd like to thank Ice Castles and our good friends at Star Bank, the folks at Connecticut, Rapala, and Hewitt Docks for helping get the podcast on the air and give us all this great technology to share stories. Going back to the foraging, yes, we had produced television stories on your group, but for me, watching those people, you had Gary, is it Krachnick? Am I saying that right?
Gary Krasner.
Excuse me. And who is just a mushroom nut, no pun intended. But he's also an acclaimed chef, and to see him out in the woods cooking, and he had like a posse around him, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's a rock star.
Yeah, he was cooking over under that overhang. He had these big saucepans. I mean, they felt like they were 4 feet across, and he was doing his magic, and he just had a cult following around him. Just people who wanted to be in his shadow. Right? That's magical to me.
I have so many great memories with Gary. I met him when he was the chef for Moscow on the Hill for many years, and originally met him there. And I instantly, had a bit of a connection with him. He's from Russia originally, and if you grew up in Russia, you grew up picking mushrooms like we might grow up fishing.
Right.
And for him, it was like, oh, holy cow! This is, I could get together with somebody who knows mushrooms like I know mushrooms, and I was like, holy cow, I can get good food. but
better than good.
Awesome food. But one quick funny story, it wasn't that year, but I think it was the year before. we had a couple come up as part of the group of 50, and they were, I suppose, in their mid late 40s or so. And, as they walked up, you could clearly see that the man was not happy. He had kind of a scowl on his face, and the woman looked ecstatic. And Gary and I were standing together, kind of welcoming people as they were arriving. And they walked up as a group, and he says to us, "Listen, I want you to know, I don't like foo-foo food, and I'm not into mushrooms. I just brought my wife because it's her birthday present."
Wow.
The reason I love to tell that story is because that individual ended up working for us about 6 months later.
Right.
So he discovered that foo-foo food was pretty darn good, and the mushroom hunting was awesome. So it's, even for people who it doesn't necessarily strike them that they might enjoy doing such a thing, it's very rare that somebody comes on one of these trips and doesn't have an awesome time and is surprised by how much fun they had. I'd probably put my wife in that category, but she's not. Grew up in Mexico City, a big city. Not somebody who is really into the outdoors a whole lot. Like to go shopping,
Yeah,
but
right.
Got her out there, and to her surprise, I really enjoyed it. And so I'd encourage people to, you can be young, you can be old, you can be anything in between. It's a great family activity. It doesn't really cost anything to get out there and enjoy yourself. Just a whole lot of reasons to get out and have fun.
All right, so explain a hunt. Like, what is it like? How do you need to gear up? Where do you go? What do you do?
Yeah, so when I said earlier that I think often of tactics with hunting and fishing, I would use that description. So for me, the first thing I'm doing is identifying a piece of land based on what types of trees are growing there, because many of the mushrooms we pick are called saprophytic mushrooms, and they grow on dead wood and decomposing wood. But there's also another kind of mushroom called mycorrhizal, and they have a sort of symbiotic relationship with trees, and different mushrooms associate with different trees. So if I'm in the bottom half of the state and I'm looking for chanterelles, really what I'm first looking for is a bunch of white oak trees, because I know chanterelles like white oak trees. And so a lot like fishing, I look at that big body of water and I can immediately cross off that back bay that's only 3 feet deep, and I can immediately, get rid of 80% of the middle of the lake because it's too deep. And, you just narrow it down to what provides the right environment for what it is you're looking for. So the right amount of moisture, the right trees, the right ground cover. And again, just like hunting and fishing, over time, you develop a bit of an eye for that. So anytime I'm driving, spring, summer, or fall, I'm constantly sort of scanning the woods and looking for these little spots that I can come back to later and check up on.
And what are you wearing? Just rubber boots and just
me, I'm sort of back in the day before I got into all of this, I was a headhunter, and I was not the typical headhunter there. Although I did wear a suit and tie, my hair was entirely too long, and I'm kind of that way in the woods. I typically wear shorts and a t-shirt because it's hot, heavy. I'm walking 10, 15 miles. It's, my legs have gotten used to being scraped up all year and being bit by mosquitoes. And I'd forgo the layer to be more comfortable. But most people, and I do wear a good pair of hiking boots. But most people, you can wear whatever you can go out in a pair of jeans and a shirt, and as long as you got good hiking boots, I think you're good to go. On the other hand, if you're really making something out of it, they make some great outdoor gear these days with the breeze through shirts and the lightweight pants and so forth. So it just depends on your budget and how committed you are to it. I will say that my wife finally talked me into going and buying some actual gear for the outdoors, and I was pleasantly surprised that, hey, it actually does make me more comfortable. So it is kind of nice if you have some gear that's specifically made to be out in the woods.
Well, and right now I think part of it for me is just getting out in the woods, right? It's rebirth. Things are starting to green up. The woods smell fresh. They smell new.
Absolutely. All the green, we've been going through the doldrums of winter for so long, and it's just nice to get out there and breathe the air and walk the woods. And it's you can relate. A bad day of fishing is still a pretty good day.
I wouldn't know. Now when it comes to morel fishing,
Boy, I teed that up, didn't I?
thank you. You're the best. I've had a lot of days where I never find morels though. Oh man. But it's funny, right? Once you start, you cannot stop. When you find the mother lode, a funny story, a friend of mine, Randy Havel, talks about they were in South Dakota years ago, and they had learned that there were some islands out on, I believe it was the Missouri River, that had morels. So they actually hired a fishing guide to shuttle them by boat out to these islands. And Randy tells the story that they got out there and they found the right side of the island, and there were morels as far as you could see. And they had their heads down, and they literally had burlap bags, and they were just picking as fast as they could. But what they had not noticed is the skies were starting to darken. Pretty soon, the guide said, "We've got storms coming. We need to go." And they couldn't stop. They wouldn't stop picking, right? Because they just had an endless...
When are they going to do that again, right?
Right. So Randy talks about they could hear sirens going. They watched a tornado cross the river while they picked morels. And he looks back and says, well, how dumb is that? But it was the lure of those dang mushrooms. They literally could not stop because that was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity they had. And he was willing to...
I respect that level of commitment.
Yes, give his life for it, right? and
Right.
and I've had days like that where you snake around every tree you pop around, you go, oh my gosh, 2 more, 3 more. Oh my gosh, look over there, 2 more, 3. And pretty soon you're like a mile further into the woods than you thought you were. That's the reward we were talking about. That's the fun of this, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You always are left with great stories, if nothing else, right?
Yeah.
That reminds me of a trip we took, I think about 2 years ago now. We were up in northern Saskatchewan. There was a big burn up there. And the reason I got up there at all was somebody from I forget which band of Indian community up there it was, but somebody got a hold of me and said, hey, there's a big burn, lots of morels. Love to have you come up and pick with us. And
wow.
I didn't know the person, other than they got in touch with me, and I thought, well, that's kind of a long way to go on a whim, but me and my general manager, Chris Daniels, hopped in the car and we drove to northern Saskatchewan. I think it was about 17 hours or some crazy thing. Huh. And just like your friend, there was a series of islands. There had been a massive burn, and there were just thousands upon thousands upon thousands of morels. I mean, it was just absolutely insane. It was a great trip. We got into this little town. You might have maybe been up there, Bill. There's a little town called Flin Flon.
Oh, geez, that's way up there.
Tiny little town. Right. A tiny little town. So we get there and I call this guy, and to make a long story short, for 2 days, for one reason or another, he couldn't show up. And I was like, oh, this is a bust. This is a total bust, Mm-hmm. And he finally showed up on the 3rd day, and he says, hey, I know a buddy of mine who's got a place on the river system, and he says you guys can stay there with him, and he's got a fishing boat, so you can do some fishing as well as the morel picking. And so that sounded awesome. And we're like, yeah, so he brought us out to this guy's house in the middle of nowhere, and we're on the reservation, and this gentleman had lived as a hermit there for, I think he said 28 years. Wow. No indoor plumbing, no electricity. Beautiful spot overlooking the whole entire river system. Just the nicest guy in the world. I think he was happy to have the company. But the funny point I was going to make is we got to talking that night, and we said, well, gee, we were really glad that you guys were friends and that you offered up your place for us to stay at. And he said, oh, I don't know him.
What?
He's just somebody that called me and said, I got a couple guys here. Is it okay if they stay with you? So there's always a story that comes out of our trips, regardless of whether you do good or bad. There's always a story.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad you got the experience. Did you catch any fish while you were up there?
Oh, I'm not exaggerating. This guy takes us out. And both Chris and I, because we're busy with the mushroom thing, we don't get a chance to wet a line very often anymore. So we're really excited. Brings us to a spot, and we immediately, first cast, I bought a 10-pound northern, I think. But we immediately started pounding the walleyes. Like, as soon as you drop down, you got a walleye.
Yeah.
And at some point, I looked at him and I said, "Do you really need any bait?" And he says, and we were using dried bait, I think. And he says, "Yeah, you kind of need to tip it with something." So I threw down just the plain lead jig, and boom, another fish. I said, "Nope, you don't need bait."
Unbelievable.
we must have caught, I don't know, 60, 70 walleyes in a couple hours. It was just it actually became monotonous at some point. Other than, hey, we should go search the waters for some big lunkers.
Yep. Well, all right, let's get back to the Gentleman Forager. Do you have events coming, later this spring or summer, even fall, where people can kind of meet you and learn to do what you do?
Absolutely. We do a number of events. Our next event would be our summer mushroom ID class, which is June 14th. And that's always held at Morrissey's Irish Pub, because, we feel like learning should be tasty and fun. So we eat some mushroom hors d'oeuvres and we drink a couple of beers, and we teach people how to identify 4 different species of mushrooms that are growing, during this time of the season, during June and July. After that, we have a family foraging fun day on July 18th, which is within an hour of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So you can bring the kids and grandma and grandpa and the dog and whoever you want. We all go out and talk about mushrooms and go hunt for mushrooms and identify mushrooms, and we'll have a chef with, I'm sure, cooking something good up. We've got a fall or a summer class rather that takes place in August. We've got our annual lobster mushroom jamboree, which you know about,
yeah,
which is just an awesome time to get up there with the chefs and the band and the food and the fun. And this year we're going to be up on the Iron Range again, actually at not the exact location we were at with you guys last, but very nearby there. So that's a great one to join us if you like to get away for a weekend. And then we wrap things up in October with Matsutake Madness. Matsutake is a really coveted mushroom around the world. It can be quite expensive, but I recently discovered that Matsutake grow in Minnesota. So we go out and get a bunch of Matsutake together and bring some great chefs, and we'll have that event at the Rathskeller building, which is adjacent to our retail store, Forest to Fork, at the Keg and Case Market in St. Paul.
So fun. And before you go, I have to ask you this. How many species or kinds of mushrooms can people forage around this part of the world?
Well, I forage as many as about 50 different species. Obviously, some of them in very small numbers and some of them in much bigger numbers. But we teach about 15 species over 3 classes. It depends on how much time we have, but it's at least 12 and as many as 15. And I like to tell most people, it's fairly easy to get on the morel train. But when you move on from there, and if you add 1 or 2 a year, and you just work on that a little bit, by the time you turn around, there's a half dozen pretty well, and you can go out on your own, and it's just it just gets more and more fun with more and more knowledge, and you become more and more successful. So it just keeps feeding itself.
One more story for you. A few years back, I was in Finland with our friends at Rapala and Petre. They had a place out on the Baltic Sea. And for anyone who maybe has been to the Baltic before, it looks like northern Minnesota. You feel like you're on Lake Vermilion or Lake of the Woods. You cannot tell the difference.
Nice.
But everyone there, right? Finland borders Russia. Everyone there picks mushrooms. So,
right.
So we smoked perch that we had caught. By the way, their perch are, they average 1 to 2 pounds, and a 3-pounder is, an okay day. Yeah, unbelievable. Nice. So we're smoking these perch, and Petre says, let's go pick mushrooms. So we go out behind the cabin where their sauna is hiding, because that's the hangout. And
gotta have a sauna, right?
And he starts picking these mushrooms and says, go ahead, you try. So I look at what he's picking, and they're all over the place. So I pick the same thing, and I go, huh? He says, Nope. And I'm looking, I can't see any difference between these yellowish kind of mushrooms. So he picks another one. He says, you try. And I pick, and he says, nope. They are so accustomed, right? Good mushroom hunters are so accustomed to what they're looking for. Honestly, and I'm not being facetious. They looked exactly the same, but they were different. And I remember Petri saying, don't worry, they will not kill you. You'll just be close.
I just wish it had.
Right.
Yeah. I think, that the whole back to the fishing, if you ask somebody from a state other than Minnesota and somebody maybe from the city and you show them, a pumpkin seed versus a bluegill, it's very similar to them. They look at it and they go, yeah, it's the same fish. To you or I who have seen both of these fish,
Sure.
a bazillion times, they look quite different.
Sure.
There's distinguishing characteristics that separate them, even though generally they look alike. So yeah, I could definitely relate to that. That's part of the fun about getting out there with people in the woods is that, it's one thing to read about it in a book, but it's another thing to your story when you're there with the person and they can point out the subtle differences and why the one you picked wasn't the exact one he picked.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that's why people need to meet people like you, because you know and you're the expert and you can guide. So, well, you are the gentleman forager, Mike, and you are one of the coolest guys around, and foraging seems like it is hip again, and I think we're realizing that it's a really positive thing, right? There are a lot of benefits to natural.
Absolutely.
All right. Well,
absolutely.
Good luck with the events
Thanks
this
so
year.
much,
I hope
Bill.
to catch up. Yeah, we need to get back into the woods together. We're overdue. But people can catch up
for sure.
For one
you give me a call, I'll take you out when you get the time.
Me, it's when you get the time. You're the busy guy these days.
I'll make time.
Again, this is the Minnesota Bound Podcast. Thanks to Hewitt Docks, Rapala, Connecticut, Starbank, and Ice Castles for helping us all share our stories. For now, I guess it's time to grab. I use a fishing net. I use my trout fishing net as my collection bin for some reason when I'm out in the woods catching or chasing mushrooms. But for now, let's get outdoors. And Mike, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bill.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We will see you next week on the Minnesota Bound Podcast.